Hello, and welcome to the Science for Policy podcast. My name's Toby, and today I'm joined by Professor Michèle Knodt and Tome Sandevski. Michèle Knodt is Professor of Comparative Politics and European Integration at the Technical University Darmstadt. Her areas of research include energy transformation, critical infrastructures, and EU governance. She regularly advises policymakers on the EU level and also at national and regional levels in Germany. And Tome Sandevski works at the Unit for Policy Engagement at Goethe University Frankfurt. He coordinates the science policy dialogue projects of the Rhine-Main universities. So, Michèle and Tome, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having us.
Hello.
Okay, so let's get straight into it. Our topic today is a fellowship program, which has been running for quite a few years now, bringing together policymakers and researchers in Germany, and it's organised by Tome here, and Michèle is one of the experts who's taken part. So perhaps I could start by asking you, Tome, to tell us a bit about the fellowship program. How did it come about? Who created it?
Well, the Mercator Science Policy Fellowship Program is a program which is jointly run by the three Rhine-Main universities, Darmstadt, Frankfurt, and Mainz. And the idea behind this was to establish a structure that would bring policymakers and our researchers together in a systematic way. There are numerous researchers at our universities who are members of advisory boards or who are conducting policy analysis and writing policy papers or evaluations on a regular basis. But the Rhine-Main universities wanted to establish a program that would aim at bringing also those researchers and policymakers together who had not been in touch so far via mechanisms like advisory boards or commissioned research. So this was the basic idea behind the program.
Okay, how long has it been running?
Since 2016, so more than 7 years.
Okay, and you said it allows policymakers and researchers to meet in a structured way, but my understanding is that it's a fairly informal style of meeting, right?
Yes. I mean, the policymakers have to apply to our program, and they have to submit topics or list of topics of interest or questions they're interested in. And once we accept them in our fellowship program, we compile a list of researchers who have expertise at our universities, and then we organize face-to-face meetings, which do indeed happen in a very informal way. Yeah.
Right. And Michèle, you have taken part in this. What was it like?
I mean, these conversations are truly exceptional because you meet people in that informal way, what Tom just said, and you just can talk about everything which is in your issue area and which is in the issue area of the fellow coming in. And you don't have that in any other form.
Yeah, it's certainly a bit different from what we talk about a lot on this podcast, which is kind of structured, formalized science advice systems. Who were these people you were talking to? What kinds of policymakers?
Yeah, I was talking with over 20 fellows yet, and they were coming from local institutions, from regional federal ministries, including ministries of economics, finance, science, development. They were also coming from the EU, from the Directorate General, from energy and from research, but also just some representatives from NGOs or from the media. And as Tom said, they are matching people. So I talked to them in my own research areas. We were talking about sustainable energy politics, about climate change, environmental politics, the future of the EU, but also about critical infrastructure and crisis management.
Did you know going into each meeting what they wanted to talk about? Or were you kind of freestyling?
I mean, I also got a little briefing what they want to talk about, but actually you have to think, so we meet, we don't know each other, and each of us is first telling, what is he doing or she doing and what I'm doing, and then you find your way to talk in the issues which you find interesting at that moment.
Yeah, wow, so it is really organic. But it sounds like the preparation is not so organic, right? Who chooses whom? Do policymakers say, I'm interested in this topic, so please send me this expert? Or is it more for the experts to say, I think I've got something to say to this kind of policymaker?
Well, it is structured. Let's say a policymaker is interested in the issue of how can energy consumption be reduced. in such a case, we compile a list of experts, including experts from architecture, engineering, but also political science, economics, and other disciplines. And the policymaker will take a look, and he or she will then tell us about their preferences. And so a policymaker might be interested in the effectiveness of energy taxes. So the policymaker would like to talk to economists, but it might also be the case that the policymaker wants to know about the effectiveness of policies in certain areas. So political scientists like Michèle would be the right people to talk to.
But you also ask us if it's okay.
Of course, yeah. Yes, we also send the list of our fellows and the topics of interest to the researchers. And of course, they can also choose the policymakers they would like to meet.
Yeah. The way you describe it makes it sound like there's quite a lot of demand on both sides, actually.
Yes. I mean, we have accepted almost 200 policymakers into our program, and they have conducted almost 2,500 face-to-face meetings or virtual meetings with more than 700 researchers. So there's quite a demand on both sides. Okay.
And is there scope to do more, or are you keeping a lid on the numbers?
Actually, we're a bit limited when it comes to the number of policymakers we can accept into our program. And the limiting factor is the fact that the policymakers visit us twice per year, and they visit us as a group. So during each visit, we organize between 150 and 250 meetings, which is quite a lot. So in terms of resources, we can usually not accept more than 25 or 30 policymakers.
Oh, I see. So I hadn't quite imagined it that way. So essentially a delegation of these 25 or 30 policymakers turns up twice a year, and you just kind of put them in little rooms and have them talk to academics.
Yeah, we sent them to the offices of the academics. Yes.
This is you have to say, Tom, your team is doing an amazing job in really sending these people around, because there are 3 huge campuses, and these people have to be coordinated, and it has to be coordinated with our timetable, and we have to squeeze in here one for 1 hour, but then he has to go somewhere else. So this is really logistically a great job you're doing.
Yes, and that's actually the biggest challenge. So we have to sure to make that the policymakers are going to reach the offices of the researchers at the right time.
Yeah, okay. So this is clearly a successful program. I mean, notwithstanding logistical challenges, and I can appreciate those challenges as someone who's got lost on more than my fair share of university campuses in my life. But so what you described so far sounds kind of, well, I was going to say ad hoc, not on the organizational side, obviously. I mean, it seems very slick, but I mean, the way policymakers and researchers approach it as like a bonus opportunity to interact rather than anything more structured. Fair enough. But then I start to wonder, because this is run by 3 universities in a fairly constrained geographical area. So Darmstadt, Frankfurt and Mainz, northwest of Germany. And you said it's only 25 policymakers per year, but then over 7 years, that still adds up to surely quite a high proportion of the available policymaker pool in the area, as it were. So I wonder whether you get any sense that this scheme is starting to establish itself as a recognised route of science for policy advice. You know, do policymakers start to recognise and depend on it in any more of a consistent way, like alongside the other routes they have to get science advice?
Yes, it serves 2 points. First, yes, they can ask for policy advice directly. Maybe they have a topic which they want especially to discuss with one of us, and then for sure we are doing that. But it's an investment in the future for both sides, because it establishes a network. And this makes it so special, because usually you recommend to politicians on a specific topic at that point of time, and that's it. But this is sometimes they don't want exactly a policy recommendation. They just want to get in touch with us. And as I said, I mean, they tell what they are doing, I tell what I'm doing, and then we start talking about special issues. And then you establish a contact, which maybe he's giving that contact to his colleague, or maybe we follow up at that meeting and I send him something. Sometimes we invite these people for our panels where we need of a politician or an admin person or whatever it is. So this is more than a policy advice in one point of time.
Yes, and if so, the idea is also to actually establish networks between researchers and policymakers, and the meetings are often a first step. And each policymaker meets about 16 researchers during the fellowship. And so, if the policymaker needs research or scientific advice in the future, he has a personal network of 16 researchers he or she can approach. And if the researchers cannot help them, they have colleagues who might have the expertise needed.
Mm-hmm. And do you track these follow-up conversations? Do you keep tabs on what's come out of these meetings and what is taken forward?
Yes, we try tracking them, and we have a quite impressive list. But it often happens that the policymakers and or the researchers will forget informing us about follow-up activities, which is perfectly fine as long as they happen. But we have quite an impressive track record of researchers who have been invited to ministries or to the European Commission, but also many researchers invite policymakers to attend conferences or to give presentations or similar activities.
And it's hard to track because sometimes that happens 2 years after the person had met us.
Yeah, well, it's the same story for trying to track the impact of anything like this. The longer the delay, also, the less confident you can be in attributing the effect to the cause, of course.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So a few minutes ago, you hinted at the involvement of policymakers at a European level. So this isn't just German government. You draw from a wider pool.
Yes. And we have policymakers from Directorates General of the European Commission, and we have also quite a few policymakers from the OECD, but also international organizations like the World Bank or the OSCE. So it's actually a very diverse program.
Yeah, okay. And is it deliberately constrained just to the policy community? I mean, you basically have a model where people who need scientific expertise can meet with people who have scientific expertise, and that's not just policymakers who have that need.
I mean, we also accept policy professionals from non-governmental organizations and also journalists, but 80% of our fellows are actually policymakers, and due to our limited resources, we actually have to focus on policymakers.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. So maybe you've already covered some of this in what you've said, but it strikes me that especially in Germany, policymakers often have very many different sources of scientific advice and different formalized ways to engage with the scientific community anyway. But it sounds like what you've created is nonetheless still quite in demand. Why do you think that is? What do you offer that policymakers can't get through the other channels that they have?
I mean, what we can add is an informal setting. So the policymakers are free to speak about the issues they are facing. They can ask all the questions they're interested in. We are not taking minutes. So this is the biggest asset we are bringing to the table. And in addition, we bring also researchers and policymakers together who would have not met otherwise. And if you look at advisory boards or other mechanisms, you will often discern path dependencies. So let's say policymakers working in ministries of finance, they are likely to talk to economists, and but we also arrange meetings with scientists from areas like communication studies or social sciences, political sciences. So the policymakers have a wide range of experts to choose from.
And I think, if I may add, I think they know that we don't have a special interest at that moment. We don't want to lobby anything. We don't have an interest to sell our research. And that's very important for them because they just can ask us. And sometimes they even ask, well, the advisory board advised on this and this for that and that policy. What do you think about it? Was that a good advice? What would you have said? And it's this face-to-face informal atmosphere which let us talk openly without any interest from my side to convince that person now that my view is better than the others.
Yeah, it's very interesting you mentioned that, Michèle, because I was thinking a bit about this question of bias as well, and the idea of the advisor or the researcher having something to sell or like a position to push. Because you say they know, you say the policymaker knows that you don't have that kind of agenda and so they feel more comfortable. Okay, but how do they know? I mean, how is that ensured? Because I don't want to sound too much like this scheme is clearly working, right? So I'm not trying to pick holes in something that's working well. But you're describing a structure where there are these one-to-one meetings in private, I guess, or at least no notes kept, no agenda other than this introductory kind of matchmaking process to make sure you have something to talk about. That informality might be a strength, but there are also reasons why more formal, structured mechanisms have more formality and more structure. And those reasons are to do with things like avoiding bias and ensuring that the policymaker gets a well-rounded, balanced scientific view, and a high-quality one and so on. And also the democratic principles like openness and transparency, the idea that voters have the right to know what advice their elected representatives have received. And it sounds like you get some strong advantages from sidestepping all that and doing it informally, but you also lose out on those safeguards. Is that something you've thought about at all?
Not yet, I would have to admit, and because rather than providing science advice, we actually regard this program as organizing informal chats and actually establishing channels of dialogue.
So you characterize it as networking rather than science advice first and foremost.
Yes, and it's not only the policymakers who learn a great deal about science, but also the participating researchers. They learn more about policy making and policy context.
Right. The benefits to researchers. Michèle, do you want to say a bit about this?
Yeah, for me, it's always good that I can learn something. The benefit is twofold. I mean, I can instantly learn from that opportunity about my research. It's a fresh perspective. It's a person I usually don't talk to. It's a chance to discuss our finding with an expert. Like gaining insights from government officials on the core of your own research is very good. You also can learn, as Tome already said, something about how systems are functioning. I mean, me as political scientist, I don't ask so much how is policy making done, because I at least think I know about, but I vividly recall a terrific chat with a media representative who shared valuable tips for me on how to break into the media scene to just make my research more visible. So I can always learn something. And in addition, it's what we just already said. It's an expanding network. It's about forging connections with policymakers for future research endeavors.
And of course, there are publicly available information on policy making. Researchers can visit the websites of policy making institutions or read strategy papers or read laws. But there's also this informal knowledge that is available in capitals, and it makes sense to talk to policymakers in an informal way, because they can often explain why laws work in a certain way, or maybe why they're not going to work. So this is also very valuable knowledge they can provide.
What are the big topics that you get asked to cover frequently? Or most
These are
often,
topics
perhaps?
like political reforms, political communication, also the impact of digitalization and artificial intelligence on economies and societies, and also issues like how to deal with climate change, the challenges posed by irregular migration. So these are very popular topics. And of course, everything related to the European Union is also a very popular topic.
Yeah, interesting. In that list, there seemed quite a lot of social sciencey stuff, some kind of big systemic questions about how things are evolving, rather than individual technical questions about details.
Yes, indeed, about 50% of researchers participating in our program are social scientists, and researchers from STEM, they account for about 20% of the participating scientists. And the reason behind this is that many policymakers want to learn more about the impact of technical developments in areas of digitalization or artificial intelligence, and how to make policy decisions in areas like renewable energy or similar areas. So this is why social scientists play a very prominent role, as well as economists.
But we had lately, I think we had also people from engineering when we are talking about climate change or energy transformation. I just remember that we had talks also with my colleagues from engineering.
Okay, engineering, yes, so very practical and applied. Are there questions that come up sometimes that you find more difficult to answer?
Yes, I mean, actually, it's not such a question-answer situation. We talked a lot about that it's more a dialogue. But anyway, it's paradox, but often the most basic and broad questions prove to be the most challenging for us, because we can explain very good our detailed research, but then they ask questions like, how to stop climate change, or what's the future of the European Union? These are perfect examples where you think, okay, do we have now a day time or what I'm going to say now. So you really have to think, okay, where do I start and where do I stop? Or how can energy consumption be reduced? I mean, all these broad questions and that easy looking questions sometimes are the most difficult ones. And many policy fellows ask for recommendation like the future development of something, where is the EU going to evolve over the next 20 years or something like that. And I mean, we are not omniscient, so both sides have to find their way in the conversation, and I have to express, okay, I cannot give you a complete answer, but this is where I'm working on, and there I can give you some solutions for the future or something like that.
Yes, and if I may add, it's interesting to see that policymakers often deal with issues which are cross-disciplinary in nature, and it's sometimes a challenge for them to understand that our researchers have to develop expertise in certain areas. So, for example, if a policymaker asks a question like, what were the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on families, schools, hospitals, and businesses, we are unlikely to find one researcher who can answer all these questions. So, and we often tell our policy fellows to think about face-to-face meetings like a puzzle. So each meeting is going to add another piece to the puzzle, but in the end there might still be some gaps in the overall picture.
Yeah, but I guess one of the advantages then of this informal one-to-one conversation format is that you can explore ways to answer those very tricky questions, or you could explain why they can't be answered in the way they've been asked. And if you're lucky, then both sides go away with a new understanding, right? Even if it wasn't what they expected. And that's something that's a bit harder to achieve maybe with a more formalized science policy interface with a clear question and answer
Actually, this is what is also, I think, also interesting for the policymakers, because if we explain, well, that big question, this is how we start researching on it, or this is our perspective, and then actually they are always quite happy with the answer, I think.
Good. Do you think this format is something that could be replicated elsewhere? In fact, is it being replicated elsewhere?
We are not the only university network running this type of fellowship program. We were inspired by the Center for Science and Policy at Cambridge University, which has been running a pretty huge policy fellowship program for many years. And recently the European Commission also initiated a call for applications for pairing schemes which are related to the Science Meets Regions program of the European Commission. So there are also similar approaches on the European level.
Okay. And what about future improvements? What's on the cards, or have you been daydreaming about the ways it could be even better?
Actually, for us, it would be really interesting to have the other side. I mean, to make it more bidirectional. So we can choose ministries to go and to visit. That would be also really good for us, because we can only take what is coming, but we cannot go there and say, I would like to talk to a person in Ministry X or Ministry Y. That would be also nice if we could expand that model.
Yes, I mean, we can think about organizing kinds of study trips to ministries in Berlin or the Commission in Brussels. So this is a good idea indeed.
Yes, and because there are some I would like to talk so much, but they're never coming.
Wait, but like who? I mean, I don't want you to name names, but like what areas are you thinking of?
No, I would like to talk to the people who are really doing decisions in energy transition, and just to talk to them and to say, look, I mean, here is another opportunity. Have you ever heard about it? Just like this, I mean, not lobbying, but just talking a bit more, because there's a lot more out there than politicians have in their mind or the administration has on their desks. Just to open their mind for other solutions, or that would be great.
Yeah. Well, on that note, there's something I should have asked you earlier, perhaps, which is, are there any politicians, as in like elected policymakers, taking part in this scheme? Or is it, by and large, civil servants?
We had a few members of regional parliaments. Of course, elected politicians can also apply to the program, but we also have to say that they have to visit us twice a year, and elected politicians they do not have that much time. This is why we are targeting policy professionals who are usually heads of units in ministries or other policymaking institutions.
Yeah, I can understand that. I guess it's a big ask for an elected politician to dedicate that kind of time twice.
And yes, and then they would also have to submit an application, including a list of topics they're interested in, and also a motivation letter and a letter of recommendation.
Yeah, it's not going to happen in general. I understand that. So then the last question from me, maybe, we talked a bit ago about how difficult it is to track and take credit for follow-up conversations and the general network building that emerges from a scheme like this. But do you have either any case studies you want to highlight or any kind of quantifiable impact measurements which tell you how the program is doing in general, other than the obviously continuing demand and your own, I guess, warm and fuzzy feelings?
Yes, we conduct surveys on a regular basis. So we ask the participating researchers whether they consider the face-to-face meetings to be rewarding, and almost all say that they do so. 70% of the researchers tell us that they derive ideas for research questions by talking to policymakers, which is also a great feedback. And the policymakers are also quite content with the program, which our surveys show. And you asked about case studies. I can name one, for example. We have a policy fellow who's working for the Hessen Ministry of Environment, who's interested in chemical safety, and he talked about the issue of communicating complex issues with a scholar from linguistics, Professor Janich at Technical University Darmstadt. And they had follow-up meetings, including other researchers and colleagues from the Ministry of Environment. And one outcome was that the Ministry of Environment updated the guidelines on public relations. So this is a small case study. Sometimes also policy fellows will tell us how meetings influenced some policy-making decisions, but this has to be off record. Let's say we better cut this part off, so we'll stick to the case study. Yeah, but I can provide another example. We had one policy fellow during the Corona crisis in early 2020. He needed expertise on the issue of how tracking apps work, and we were able to arrange 2 virtual meetings with experts on cybersecurity on the same day, and this proved to be very valuable for him.
Yeah, I can well imagine. Well, listen, both of you, it's been great to talk to you. As I said earlier in the conversation, we talk a lot on this podcast about quite formal and structured science advice systems and the scholarship behind them and so on. So it's really interesting to me to learn about a scheme that is at the other end of the spectrum, in a way. So thanks very much to both of you, Tome Sandevski and Professor Michèle Knodt, for this really interesting conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Toby.
The Science for Policy podcast is created by the Scientific Advice Mechanism to the European Commission. It's produced and presented by Toby Wardman, with additional editing by Nina Skorczak. The Scientific Advice Mechanism provides evidence-based expertise and policy recommendations to inform policymaking in the European Commission. This podcast is funded by the EU via the SAPEA Consortium. Our theme music is composed by Carlo Alfredo Piatti and performed by Elisaveta Shushenko.